The heater died at 2:13 in the morning, and by 2:20, I was convinced my best friend and I were going to freeze to death in a tiny mountain cabin with one bed between us. Outside, snow slammed against the windows like handfuls of sand, the trees groaned beneath the weight of the storm, and every breath inside the cabin turned into a pale cloud. I was standing beside the useless heater, desperately pressing buttons that no longer worked, when Emma pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders and looked at me with chattering teeth. Then she said the words that changed something between us forever: "Just get in. I'm freezing." If you enjoy emotional stories about friendship, second chances, and the unexpected ways people become our safe place, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs a little kindness, leave a comment, and subscribe to Ripple of Kindness for more stories about second chances. Emma and I had been best friends for almost 12 years, long enough that people often assumed we were secretly dating. We always laughed whenever someone said it, because to us, our friendship felt too familiar to be romantic. She knew how I took my coffee, which songs I skipped, and exactly when I was pretending to be okay. I knew she cried during animated movies, hated thunderstorms, and always said she wasn't hungry before stealing half my fries. We had survived college, terrible jobs, broken relationships, family arguments, and long stretches when neither of us knew what we were doing with our lives. But there was one thing we had never survived: being completely honest about what we meant to each other. The cabin trip was supposed to be simple. Emma had been struggling after losing her job, and I had been exhausted from spending months caring for my father after his surgery. We were both carrying invisible weight, so I suggested a weekend away in the mountains. No phones if we could help it. No work. No family problems. Just two friends, a fireplace, some hiking, and enough food to survive 3 days. The cabin looked perfect when we arrived that afternoon. It was small but beautiful, surrounded by pine trees and buried beneath fresh snow. There was only one bedroom, and when Emma opened the door and saw the single bed, she stared at it for several seconds before laughing. I immediately volunteered to sleep on the couch. Neither of us expected the storm to become so severe. By evening, the road disappeared beneath snow, the electricity flickered twice, and the temperature dropped sharply. We tried to make jokes about our bad luck, but somewhere between dinner and midnight, the laughter disappeared. The fireplace was decorative rather than functional, the blankets were thin, and the little electric heater became our only hope. Then it made a clicking sound and went completely silent. I tried everything. I unplugged it, waited, plugged it back in, checked the outlet, and even searched online for instructions while my fingers became numb. Nothing worked. Emma sat on the edge of the bed, watching me with a strange sadness in her eyes. I told her I would sleep on the couch anyway, but she shook her head. The couch was directly beneath a drafty window, and there was no chance I would stay warm there. I insisted, mostly because I was afraid of the alternative. She finally looked at me and said, "Just get in. I'm freezing." For a few seconds, neither of us moved. Then I climbed into the bed fully dressed, leaving as much space between us as possible. Emma pulled the blankets over both of us, and we lay there stiffly, facing opposite directions. It was ridiculous. 12 years of friendship, and suddenly the distance between our shoulders felt like a canyon. The storm grew louder. Every few minutes, the wind shook the cabin, and I could hear branches hitting the roof. Emma's shivering became worse. Without thinking, I moved closer and wrapped an arm around her. She went still, then slowly relaxed against me. Her head rested against my chest, and for the first time that night, neither of us pretended we weren't scared. Then she whispered that she had been afraid to tell me something. I asked what it was, and after a long silence, she admitted that she had almost canceled the trip. Not because of the weather or the cabin, but because she had been afraid I was leaving her behind. She explained that after everything happening in my life, she had started believing that our friendship mattered more to her than it did to me. She had watched me become busy, distant, and exhausted, and instead of asking what was wrong, she convinced herself that I was slowly outgrowing her. Her words hurt because I knew exactly what she meant. I had been doing the same thing. I had been afraid that once my father recovered, once Emma found another job, once our lives became stable, we would discover that the friendship that had carried us for years was only something we remembered fondly. So I had started protecting myself by expecting the ending before it arrived. I told her the truth. I had never been distant because I cared less. I had been distant because I cared too much and didn't know how to ask someone to stay when I felt like my own life was falling apart. Emma became quiet. Then she told me that she had spent years waiting for me to understand something she had never been brave enough to say. I was her home. The words broke something open inside me. All those years, I had thought home was a place. I had thought it was my father's house, the apartment I rented, the city where I worked, or some future place I would eventually build. But lying there in a freezing cabin with snow covering every road out, I realized home could also be a person who knew your worst days and stayed anyway. We talked until almost dawn. We talked about the people we had lost, the mistakes we regretted, the relationships that had damaged our confidence, and the dreams we had abandoned because they seemed too difficult. We laughed quietly so we wouldn't disturb the storm, and sometimes we simply held each other without saying anything. Nothing inappropriate happened. Nothing needed to. The closeness was emotional, not physical. For once, neither of us was trying to define what we were. We were simply two people admitting that we mattered to each other more than we had allowed ourselves to understand. When morning finally arrived, the storm had weakened. The cabin was still freezing, the heater was still broken, and the road was still buried, but something inside me felt warmer than it had in years. We eventually made it home. Life did not magically become perfect. Emma still had to find work. My father still had difficult days. Bills still arrived, responsibilities still waited, and some mornings were harder than others. But we stopped assuming the other person knew what we needed. We started calling instead of disappearing. We stopped saying, "I'm fine," when we weren't. And slowly, our friendship became stronger because we finally understood that love does not always arrive with a grand confession or a perfect moment. Sometimes it arrives quietly, in the middle of a freezing night, when someone notices you are cold and simply makes room for you. Months later, Emma found a new job. My father recovered enough to return to his normal routine. One evening, Emma and I sat together on the porch of my house, drinking coffee while snow began falling outside. She looked at me and smiled, remembering the cabin. We both laughed about how terrified we had been over one broken heater and one tiny bed. But I never forgot what she had said that night. "Just get in. I'm freezing." Because sometimes those words are not really about warmth. Sometimes they mean, "Come closer. Stop pretending you have to face everything alone. Let me be there for you." And maybe that is what we all need sometimes, not someone to fix our lives, but someone willing to sit beside us when everything feels cold. If this story touched your heart or reminded you of someone who stayed beside you during your hardest moment, please like the video, share it with someone special, and leave a comment. Your support helps Ripple of Kindness reach more people who may need a reminder that kindness, friendship, and second chances still exist. And before you leave, comment, "I'll make room for you," if you believe the people we love deserve to know they never have to face the cold alone. Because sometimes the greatest love story is not about falling in love. Sometimes it is about finally realizing that the person beside you has been home all along.